Good morning, Mr. Perlman.
Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome to the McCoy Center in New Albany, Ohio. We're here with about 400 orchestra students, grades 7 through 12, from New Albany, plain local schools. I'm also here with their orchestra directors, Mrs. Erica Donahoe and Mr. Aaron Wilburn. And they have such a robust, wonderful program here. We're very thankful for these teachers. And the kids are so excited to get to talk to you today. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
What am I? No, wait a second. Somebody's going to ask me some questions, right?
Yes. We've got the first student coming.
I will wait to hear your questions and I will answer them with the best of my ability.
Okay, so our first student is up here.
Hi, Mr. Perlman.
Hi.
I was wondering what originally got you into your music career and what's made you stay with it for so long?
Oh, my goodness. Well, there's not such a thing as getting into a career right away. What you have to do right away is to study the instrument and hope for the best and see if you have talent and so on. I started studying about when I was 5 years old, and people, after a while, people thought that I had a little bit of talent. So one thing led to another, and then that was in Israel. And then I came to the States when I was 13, and I appeared on a television show that probably most of you don't remember. It was called The Ed Sullivan Show. He had a variety program, and I was one of the people that were participating. And then I went then I decided I wanted to go to a music school in New York called the Juilliard School, which I did. And after a while, I made some progress, and I started playing concerts. Now, what is this? You ask what made it last that long? Well, first of all, I love music. I enjoy it very, very much, and I have a good time when I play concerts, and so as long as I enjoy it, I can go on. The important thing is not to be bored with what you do, and I'm never bored with what I do when I play music. So that's why it's going such a long time, and I'm hoping it'll continue.
Perlman.
Hi.
So, I've been listening to your music for a long time, and I was wondering, what is your favorite violin concerto?
Oh, that's a good question, and I'll give you an answer that I usually give whenever I hear that question. The one I'm playing at the moment is my favorite, so that means that I will never play anything that I don't like. I love some of the obvious, meat and potatoes kind of concertos like Mendelssohn, Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, and so on. But the important thing is to really be convinced that what you play, you like what you're doing. I would never play anything that I don't like just because I have to. If I play, so whatever I'm playing, at that moment, it's my favorite. But I love most of the things that I do, all of the things that I play, whether it's Mendelssohn or Mozart, as I said, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Brahms. I played the Dvorak. I played most of the major concertos, and I enjoy playing them. Sibelius.
I love Sibelius too.
Yeah, Sibelius, great piece, very, very good, and very, very difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Perlman.
My pleasure.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to know, as a kid, were you ever exposed to anti-Semitism? And if so, do you think it affected you growing up?
As a kid, I wasn't, because I was growing up in Israel, So, whatever I heard was history. We were talking about, my parents came from Europe. they escaped the Holocaust and so on. They came in the early 1930s and so on. So they were lucky, but most of my family, I mean, like my grandparents and so on, they perished. So I suppose you could say that I was exposed in many ways to anti-Semitism. What happened with with the Holocaust is what better exposure is that I'm being it's the obvious thing. But I grew up in Israel, and I was not surrounded by people who were anti-Semites because we were growing in this country, in Israel, and so on. I suppose if I were to grow up in places like Europe and so on, I suppose that would not be the case. But as I was a child, I was not exposed to that. But the history of my family was that they all perished. Most of them perished in the Holocaust.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Perlman.
I
was wondering, how much time do you spend practicing every day?
Oh, what a great question. Do you play the violin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was your age, I'm assuming that. How old are you?
13.
13. So when I was your age, I practiced about three hours a day. And I continued to do that really most of the, until I was like 18 or 19. The only time that I would practice more would be during the summertime, where I would go to a music camp. It was in the Adirondacks Mountain, it was called Meadow Mount. And everybody there practiced 5 hours. And what usually I like to do is to practice 50-minute hours. So you need to practice if you want to get, if you have talent and you want to get results, you need to practice. But I would say I practice about 3 hours most of my growing up, And right now, I only practice when I need to, because I'm old. So as a result, I know exactly what I need to do and what needs to be fixed, and so on. So I don't have a regular practice schedule. Some days I practice an hour, some days I don't practice, and so on. So it's all. But I would recommend, if you're talented and you love what you do, I would say 2 to 3 hours. But very careful, with really listen very carefully to what you're practicing for. Not just putting in the time, but really having a reason. What do you practice for? Are you practicing for the bow arm? Are you practicing for intonation? And so on and so forth. And the important thing is to exactly listen, because practicing has to do with repetition. So you have to repeat. When you repeat something, and it's every time that you play it, it's no good. You learn it in the wrong way. That's why it's important to really be careful and just listen carefully to what you're doing, so that every time you repeat something, that it's perfectly in tune, that the bow works, and so on. And then, so good practicing, you don't have to. I would rather have an hour of good practicing than 3 hours of, thoughtless practicing, just putting in the time, because that's not going to work. That's my advice anyway.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Mr. Perlman. I was
Yes.
wondering, what was it like to leave your home country and pursue your dreams in the United States?
Well, that was a very good question. I was to begin with, it was depressing, because I was in the 7th grade. I had a lot of friends in Israel, and I did not speak English when I came to the States. So I was kind of depressed, and sorry that I had to leave my friends and so on. But it didn't last that long, because I went into the Juilliard school, the music school, and I was busy practicing and learning to speak English. mostly by, I suppose, not just getting English lessons and so on, but also by watching television and by listening to baseball. A lot of my English, I learned by listening, watching TV and listening to baseball. At that time, I was actually a Yankees fan, and then I changed and became a Mets fan. So anyway, so that's how so it was to begin with, it was a little difficult, but then I got used to it.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Perlman. I
I
had two questions.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that you started playing the violin at age 5, and everyone can see that your impressive career requires extreme dedication and perseverance. How do you find the motivation to continue playing the violin?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. I happen to love music, so if I love what I do, uh, that's what motivates me. A lot of people ask me the same question. What do you plan to do? You've done so many things. What is the future? And I said, well, I say, as long as I'm not bored by what I'm doing, as long as I'm still interested in what I'm doing, I will continue to do so. And what's better than music? Music, and the thing is that I can play a piece over and over again, and every time I find something new in the piece, and so on. So if I play, for example, the Beethoven Violin Concerto, it happens to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, violin concerto written. I mean, every time that I play it, I find something else that I discover in the music and so on. So that keeps my interest going. And as long as I'm interested, I have no problem in repeating and so on. But that's one of the things about playing, for example, the same piece over and over again, is how do you manage to not just play it the same way you played it yesterday or the day before, but to always make it a new experience. And so that's what I try to do. That's what keeps me interested.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Perlman.
I
I was I was wondering, what advice would you give young players?
What kind? Tell me again. Advice about what? Tell me.
About playing the violin if they want to become professional players.
Well, two things. Number one, you have to love what you do. And number two, you have to put in the time, and so on. It depends how serious you are, and so on. And but the important thing is you got to practice, and you've got to practice. Like I always say, you got to practice slowly, and you got to see what happens. See where it takes you. It depends on, I don't know. Everybody has different kind of talents and so on. Some people develop their talent later, and some people develop their talent earlier. Sometimes you have somebody who is 9 years old who is extremely advanced and so on. And sometimes you have somebody who's 12 who is just a beginner. But if you put in your time and do the best that you can, and don't look around as to who is playing better than you are or worse than you are, you have to do whatever gives you the satisfaction of music, and just practice yourself and try to do the best that you can. And and then you'll see what happens. Don't try and plan too much earlier. Just right now, just practice the instrument. That's the most important thing. Practice it so that you can do it the best that you can. And then after a while, it'll develop you, and then you'll figure it out. But right now, don't try to think about it so early.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to
Good
ask a
morning.
question on behalf of one of our students. This is from Cameron Stewart, and she was wondering what or who gave you the confidence to perform in front of a live audience when you were younger?
Well, the the thing is that when you are studying and you're a student, one of the first things that happens is that you play for your teacher, and then they have student concerts. In wherever school that you play in, and then you start. So I started to play in front of an audience when I was like 6 or 7, but it was like, it was not a professional kind of situation. It was a student concert, but with the same sort of result, which is, you get a little nervous because you play in front of people and so on. So that's when I started, and the more you play in front of an audience, the more used to it you get, and then you become used to being a little nervous and so on. So that's what I started. I started like at about 6 or 7, and I would play for other students, or I would play for a student concert, or for some guests who would like to hear somebody play and so on. So that's one of the part of the ways of growing and developing as a student of any instrument, is to play in front of other people, and that's what I did.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Perlman.
I
Can you please discuss your approach to interpreting a piece of music, and how do you bring your own unique talent and voice into it?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, it depends, how I feel about the piece. As I said before, if right now, I'm not studying anything new. I'm playing stuff that I know and so on. But my approach is that to really listen to what I think the piece is all about, and not to imitate what I've done in the past, but to always find new ways of playing a piece. I keep bringing back the Beethoven Violin Concerto. And the reason I'm bringing it back, because it's a perfect example of one of the greatest pieces that were written for the violin. And so in that particular case, I find it almost easy to find new things in that piece every time that I play it in front of a public. The great thing about this concerto is that it's quite simple. It has a lot of scales and arpeggios. And so one of the challenges is, how do you make those sound musical? How do you phrase them and so on? But because the piece is so wonderful, I always find that I almost experiment as I play. Let me phrase this piece this way or that way, rather than saying, well, I played it like that yesterday and it worked well, so I'll play it the same way today. I try not to do that. That's how and then of course you study the score, trying to interpret the piece, and when you rehearse, you listen exactly. When you play violin and orchestra piece, you listen to what goes on in the orchestra part, because when you play with orchestra, the challenge is not just saying, well, this is a violin concerto and I'm the soloist and the orchestra is just there to accompany me. No, the orchestra is an essential part of the piece. And so it's like playing chamber music. It's not like, if you play I'm assuming that some of you play chamber music. And so it's not like playing a first violin part and everybody else is accompanying or so on. It's like every part is an important part of the music that you are playing. And it's the same thing with anything that I do, whether it's a recital or whether it's a performance with orchestra.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Perlman. Thank you for doing this for our orchestra program.
Sure.
My question is specifically about the Hebrides Overture, and I've heard you speak about practicing and the way you approach things. And our top orchestra at the high school is working on that overture by Mendelssohn. And I wondered if maybe you could just talk to the violinists and violists specifically about maybe how you would approach practicing that piece of music for, one, the left-hand velocity with all of those 16th notes, and managing the bow. Give them some ideas for practice.
Well, I think that the question that you ask is not only applicable to this overture, it's applicable to studying technique and so on. Well, the important thing about it is whenever you see some passages, first of all, um, make sure that the fingerings that you use to play the passages in the left hand are always the same. So I would write those fingerings in the part so that every time that you play them, you always do the shifting and so on exactly the same way. Because when you repeat something exactly the same way, you will learn it better. You know, if every time there's a variation of, you know, sometimes you use 2 and 3 or 1 and 4 and so on and so forth, then the brain doesn't really absorb that. So you have to, every time, you have to decide what is the most comfortable fingering for you, and then repeat that and do it over and over again. The way to practice it is, of course, very slowly. You know, I will repeat, you know, there's a saying that I always say, and maybe some of you may have heard it or not. When you practice slowly, you forget slowly. If you practice fast, you forget very fast. So when you practice slowly, it stays with you. The other thing that you can do is practice in rhythms. You know, so, you know, like one note is longer than the others, like bum, ba bum, ba bum, ba bum, ba bum. And if you do that, it also helps not only the left hand, but the right hand going together. But if you have to do it slowly, and then gradually increase the speed. So those two things you're doing, you got to do it slowly. You got to play it in rhythms, but also make sure that the fingerings and the bowings that you use are always the same, because then your brain will absorb that and then you will get it better.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Mr. Perlman, that answer was music to our ears. We're constantly telling them to write in finger numbers.
Oh, absolutely. It's so important. So important.
It is. And I tell them the same thing. I say, I still write in all my finger numbers, so you should too.
Absolutely. You got to do it and then really and watch. Don't just, you know, sometimes people play and then they know stuff by heart, so they don't look at the music. Always look at the music when you're practicing. You know, that by heart will come gradually. But, you know, it's this, the fingerings, and of course, slow practicing. Very important, slow practicing.
I had one other question for you. I was curious if you usually play the standard cadenzas or if you've ever written or improvised your own cadenza.
I've done some cadenzas for the Mozart violin concertos that I've played. I wrote a few, but for the big pieces, you know, I do. I mean, like for Beethoven, I always do the Chrysler cadenza. And there was one time I tried to write a cadenza a long time ago for the Paganini violin concerto, and I spent 2 days trying to write the first few bars, and then I discovered that somebody else wrote it already. So I said, well, that's very nice. Somebody else is thinking the same way. So, but there are some very good cadenzas. So with the exception of the Mozarts, I have not written anything.
Thank you.
So I had a question about memorization.
Oh,
do you have any
question.
tips about how you memorize a big concerto?
Well, I have two comments on that. Number one, don't worry about memory. Don't worry about it. Number two, if you practice slowly all the time from music and not even think about it, by the time, you know, after a while, you'll memorize it. You know, it's not like you have to practice for memory. You know, if you practice everything as I said before, same fingerings, same bowings, that really also helps the memory because it gets you it puts it, it gets into your fingers all the time if you repeat it the same way, the same fingerings, the same goings. So that I've never practiced specifically for memory. It just happened. Now, there's some people that have a problem memorizing and so on and so forth. So I'm going to say something right now that maybe people will find shocking. I mean, if memorizing prevents you from playing a beautiful performance because you're worried about memory, just use music. I mean, there were several examples of very wonderful performers that played, great performance and who used music because they had a problem with memorizing. I mean, a lot of things. People are playing unaccompanied partitas and sonata by Bach, for example. Sometimes there's a problem memorizing, but if you really practice everything slowly, after a while, you'll get it. You will get it. And as I said, if it's a real problem, don't worry about it. Just use the music.
So we're all wondering if you might play a little something on your violin. I see
Right
your
now,
case
I
right
can't.
there.
I haven't practiced.
Or maybe talk about your violin.
Oh, well, my violin is a Stradivarius, and it was made in the year 1714. And it's a great violin. It has, it doesn't, the problem with this violin is it doesn't play in tune unless I play in tune. It doesn't play by itself, but it has a wonderful sound. And I've had it for maybe 40 years already. It was the violin of my dreams. It belonged to very famous violins by the name of Yehudi Menuhin. And when I was young, I actually had the opportunity to play it. And I played it for like maybe 1 minute, and I fell in love. And so several years later, I was able to buy it from him. And so that's the violin.
Good morning, Mr. Perlman.
Morning.
I had a question.
Yes.
Now, throughout this whole thing, people have talked about having motivation throughout like your entire orchestral career. How do you get the motivation to practice every day?
That's a very good question. Well, it depends. It depends how you want to, how do you want to sound? Depends on how do you want to sound. If you want to sound good, practicing really helps. It's kind of an understatement. To get the motivation, it depends how motivated you are. I mean, I cannot, if you love what you do, and you always have this goal of sounding the best that you can sound. You're not going to sound the best that you can sound if you don't practice enough. Again, people ask me how much practicing do you do, and what is your suggestion as to what is the proper amount of practicing. And I always say that if you're a serious musician, serious instrumentalist, at least I'm not talking about wind instrument and brass instrument. I don't know. That's probably a different thing. But on the string instrument, I would say between 3 and 5 hours a day, if you're really serious, is the maximum. Sometimes we have this music program called the Perlman music program that my wife started. We've been for talented string players, and in that program they don't practice more than 5 hours and 50-minute hours. But all of these kids are extremely talented. And so what happens is that they've got, they have results right away when you practice regularly. So regular practicing, believe me, is very, very important, because, and what should motivate you is the results. And if you do the practicing correctly by listening to what you're practicing, because as I said before, practicing is all about repetition. If you repeat everything properly and do it in smaller sections, I mean, set yourself a goal. Today I'm going to practice this passage from this work or from this orchestral excerpt and so on, and I'm going to get it just right. Set yourself a goal. It doesn't have to be, a huge, the whole page. You can divide it into 3-4 bars, and make sure that those bars are fantastic. Now, when you practice every day properly, you're going to get the results, but not over immediately. It takes a little time. It's not like sometimes you practice and it sounds really good, and the next day it sounds bad again. Not to be discouraged. The results come slowly, but you have to do it regularly. If you do it regularly, you'll get good results.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Mr. Perlman. I know that you've talked about like your favorite concertos and everything, but do you by any chance have like a favorite movie score that you've heard?
Well, look, I mean, you're sort of giving me, you're setting me up. My favorite movie score, well, is the one that I was involved in, was called Schindler's List. I was very lucky to be able to play some of that score that was written by John Williams. There was another score that I did, Geisha, that also John Williams wrote. So, but of course, I love E.T. I don't know if you've seen it, but that's one of the great movie scores. I'm basically a fan of John Williams as a movie composer. I think he's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I love all those movies.
Oh,
Thank
yeah,
you.
terrific.
Hello, Mr. Perlman.
Hi.
What's the most memorable performance you've had in your career so far?
Oh my God. Well, memorable. Well, playing for Obama's inauguration in the 20-degree weather, I suppose it was memorable. Playing in the White House for a lot of various presidents and so on and so forth. I mean, but these are sort of not normal performances. This is not like going on stage and playing with a symphony orchestra or playing a recital. I've had a lot of wonderful experiences playing, but I suppose those, playing for heads of state is sort of extremely, it's very, I'm honored to be invited to do it. And playing the national anthem for a baseball game, which I've done twice. And all I can tell you is that the luck of my team was not, when I played, they lost. So when people invite me, I always say to them, "Are you sure you want to invite me? Because I may be bad luck if I played." I mean, I played well, but I think they lost the game. But anyway, so some of those unusual things are memorable.
Hi, Mr. Perlman.
I
Besides the violin, what do you think the most beautiful instrument is?
What instrument do you play?
Violin.
Oh, then it's the violin. No, besides the violin, well, listen, I love the cello, and I love the viola. I love the string instruments. When it comes to brass, I don't want to mention something and then everybody thinks that I don't like something that I did not mention. I mean, like I'm particularly I like particularly because it's part of my family, the French horn, because my son-in-law plays the French horn. So I like to play the French horn. I love oboe when it plays well. I tell you, see, I love any instrument when it's played well. Gives you such a great pleasure, and the well, when the way I define playing well is what kind of a sound you can produce from this instrument. What is a beautiful clarinet sound, or a flute sound, or an oboe sound, or as I said, or a brass, whether it's trombone or French horn and so on. It's the sound, because that's the first thing that you hear whenever you hear a performance, whether it's a pianist or a string player or a wind player or a brass player or a singer. The first thing that attracts you is the sound. And I'm talking about the beauty of the tone, and that, I mean, you might not even agree with what they do musically, but when you have a beautiful tone, that at least that grabs me. So that's, for me, is very, very important.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Perlman.
Hi.
What are your other hobbies?
Eating.
Thanks.
Cooking. I love to cook. I love to cook, to figure out, not necessarily following recipes, but figuring it out myself. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. I love to go, to watch sports. My wife and I are big baseball fans. So that's something that I'm very interested in, and so on. And just, watching movies and things like that. Of course, when it comes to music, I love to play chamber music. Chamber music is one of the greatest things. I hope that all of you are exposed to playing chamber music, because that's, first of all, repertoire-wise, it's one of usually the best things that composer wrote. I'm talking about Haydn's best things, Mozart's best work, Beethoven best work, Brahms, and so on. And it's incredible to just play with your friends and enjoy music. And so if you have a chance and an opportunity, that's what I would suggest.
Thank you.
Do you listen to any other music than classical?
Other classical music? Yes, absolutely. I love to listen, I listen to opera because I love listening to singers. I do this, and when I was growing up, I was listening to rock and roll music. So I still do that. It hits of the 50s and 60s and so on. I like to listen to that. And I just love to listen to stuff. And when something is good, it's always a great challenge to figure out why it is good, what makes it good, or when something doesn't sound so good, what doesn't work there. And that's part of the growth. You grow that way musically, is to listen, to know what you like to know, and then the other thing that I want to emphasize with those of you, maybe not right now, but as you grow a little bit older, is to try and not miss an opportunity to teach, because teaching is an important part of your own musical development, because it involves listening to somebody and making comments as to what the problems are and how they can solve it. And that's always applicable to you yourself. And I started teaching at the very early, I was teaching, I could have started teaching even earlier. I started when I was like in 18, 19 years old. But I would recommend teaching, even if you're teaching somebody who is a beginner. It doesn't have to be anybody who is very advanced. And then you have to figure out, what am I going to say to this person that will help them, that will improve the way that they play in any instrument. It doesn't matter. whether a string instrument, wind instrument, brass instrument. What can I do? What can I say to them that will help them? And then you start to really listen in a certain way, and it becomes contagious. And then you listen to yourself in the same way, and that's how you then become a part of the development, your own development, not just a teacher, but in addition to the teacher, to your teacher.
Thank you.
We have just one more question.
Yes.
Who is your idol growing up?
You mean my musical idol?
Yeah, or any other thing.
Or any other thing? Well, musically, as I was growing up, a violinist that I enjoyed very, very much was a Russian violinist by the name of David Oistrakh. But then I had a lot, I had like certain periods where I had different idols. So there was a period in which I had, I don't know if you know, old violinist, old-time violinist by the name of Fritz Kreisler, and he's written a lot of, arrangements and subscriptions, so that probably some of you may have played some of the stuff. So loved Kreisler, loved Heifetz, of course. Everybody, Heifetz is we call Heifetz the god of violinists. And then there was Isaac Stern, Nathan Milstein, and so on. So I had like periods where I had different idols. And that, again, that helped my development. The danger is always to try, if you think somebody's an idol, try to imitate them. And that's not such a great idea. You can learn from them, but you want to be, at least I wanted to be, original, do something that's original to me, not imitating somebody else. But so there were a few, and then of course, all of this rock and roll, Elvis Presley and the Shirelles and Paul Anka and all of these people that for you are probably, like really, really old, but for me, I'm old already. So I still listening to all these rock and roll groups and so on.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Morning, Mr. Perlman.
Morning.
You're most famous for playing the violin, but I wanted to ask if you've played any other instruments.
No. I wish I could play the cello, but I never did. No, and no. That's the only instrument I played was the violin. It kind of works for me. But if I had another lifetime, I would probably add something. I would add some wind instrument or something like that, or maybe the cello.
Thank you.
Well, I want to say thanks for spending your morning with us today, Mr. Perlman. We can't wait to see you here in about 10 days, April 26th, Beethoven Violin Concerto.
Oh, I don't remember that. No, I'm
Yes.
just kidding.
We're expecting you.
It was a great pleasure, and the questions were excellent. Thank you.